like I said, I'm super happy to introduce my very, very good friend, Karen Hilo. She is our presenter today. I am the host and producer. So let me tell you a little bit about Karen, and then she's going to get into an amazing conversation, and I hope you'll all contribute. Keep your cameras on, and we'll all contribute and make this a great conversation. Karen Hilo has been a student of business, specifically entrepreneurship, her whole career. She earned her undergrad from University of Delaware and her MBA from Palm Beach Atlantic University. Along the way, she also added graduate studies in mental health counseling to her resume. Karen founded C-Level Consulting, LLC. It's SEA level, cute. To her executives and boards achieved, oh wait, I gotta say that over again. I totally screwed it up. Wow, we're gonna have to do some edit work here. Karen founded C-Level Consulting LLC to help executives and boards achieve their vision. Following several long-term engagements leading severely distressed organizations back to flourishing, her own mission became developing the strengths needed in people to lead excellently. Folks, she has held all the positions in the executive suite in these different nonprofits that she's worked with. Her work is partly forward-thinking, strategic planning. The nature of turnarounds requires writing the past, i.e. forensic analysis and restorative skills. She has been privileged to support executives through counseling or consulting, individual and team coaching, and professional development workshops. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the amazing Karen Hilo.
See, you're going to say that, and that'll just trigger imposter syndrome responses.
That was the point.
Hey, everyone, thanks for joining. This is actually kind of a funny topic because I said to Jimmy, like, seriously, I want to know why we are still talking about imposter syndrome. But the reason I'm actually bringing it up is because I had a totally different topic in mind. And then I lead a CEO mastermind with nonprofit execs, and darn if it didn't come up again the last time we met. And I'm like, this thing is not going away. And when I say going away, I just feel like so much has been said about it that I'm always kind of surprised when people are still unaware of the struggle that they're feeling. There's no name for it. And I find that so interesting at this point, because I think most everybody knows about it. It seems like a very common term now. So just as a point of touching base, how much do you all know about it? If you were going to say a 1 being, I know what the term means, and a 5 means I'm somewhat of an expert, what would you say if you were going to hold up hands?
5, expert. I live it every day.
Yeah. Why did balloons just come up on Stevens?
And Eric's. Those were clever and cute.
Oh,
that. Yay.
Okay, so some of you, I mean, I would say, Jimmy, did you say a 5?
Yeah.
I think I would say a 5 too. And I don't, maybe that's just because we both talked about the fact that we have experienced it personally. So there's been so many studies on it, but I'm not really sure sometimes when imposter syndrome comes up, I'm never sure if it's the media that pushes these things when they start to see things trending, or if it's really us and they're tracking us. Because there's some words that have come across, I don't know if you've heard them in the past couple of years, things like what used to be brainwashing is now gaslighting. Something that was irksome is now a trigger. And insecurities and imposter syndrome. And I think that it's because those words are kind of like that macro influence of, we're all talking about mental health now. It's 6.5 years ago, I was hired at a mental health agency, a nonprofit. I was the CEO, and I was there to reverse this critical trend where every C-level person and half the board was just jumping ship. And in my pursuit of finding what was happening there, I tried to sit down with different leaders, current and past, and ask what they could tell me that would help me solve this puzzle. And it was interesting because I sat down with the long-term board chair, and at the time, she said my biggest problem was going to be fundraising because no one had any interest in mental health at all. People were not going to support this organization. And at the time, I remember saying, how is that even possible that you believe that? But look at everything that happened in just those 6.5 years. And I think the pandemic definitely forced the issue. We started to see where people felt that we were isolated. It kind of upended what was normal and the routine. We felt that that period where the racial tension was really, really high. And then we had financial disruption. And all that led to people talking about their anxiety, their fear, depression. And there was so much dissension as well. So mental health just shot to the forefront of conversations. I don't know about you, but maybe perhaps because I've been in that mental health space, I started to hear about self-care and compassion and resilience. And we talked about the pros and cons of working from home. And everybody was kind of struggling to find balance in the midst of all that instability. Is any of what I'm saying ringing true for you, or is it yeah, I'm just curious because I was in the mental health space for a while. So certainly I was getting, I was kind of saturated in it, but it did seem like it was a very, very loud cry from so many people just just to be able to balance themselves again. I
Karen,
think
what
that
comes to mind?
go ahead.
What comes to mind for me is
Yeah.
what you just shared. It's like another word for insecurity, another word for self-doubt. In the mental health space, I think about psychological safety, and that seems to be that other word, or that sort of a buzz out there now. In a similar regard, right? A concern around your mental health, and
Right.
And we're giving it a different name, a better name, a name that's for lack of a better way of describing it, it's catchy.
Yes.
Right? It sticks.
Yes. And there's an emotional, instead of it just being a definition, now it has an emotional attachment to it, where we seem to understand, it has like a common emotional feel to it that people can identify with. Mm-hmm. So I think with all that background, I think that's why we saw such an uptick in imposter syndrome, because this study actually started back it was originated in 1978. And there were two psychologists who interviewed 150 high achieving women, all kind of in the academic space. And they were in the age range of 20 to 45. So somewhat homogenous, but their findings indicated that these women all had self-doubt instilled in them from a very young age. And even though they had evidence of being successful, being smart, having experiences of success, they still felt like they were frauds. And they would kind of assign any achievement they had, they would assign it to like a temporary cause. And oftentimes they said it was just luck, or I was in the right place at the right time. But what's interesting is, even though that happened in 1978, and the 10-year period between 2001 and 2011, it went from one study to 400 more studies. And in the 10 years from 2011 to 2021, it went to 3,500 studies. So clearly, interest really started to balloon around this topic. And over time, they did start to look at some more diversity in the groups. And there are studies out there that indicate that the highest group that experience imposter syndrome is non-white women. So it could be Asian American, could be African American, but women. And I'm sure it's the confluence of several of those things that would cause them societally to maybe get some prejudice or bias that can make them feel even greater insecurity. So in that original study, they described a cycle, which I thought was really intriguing, this cycle of worry about intelligence, and that hard work and cover-up strategies can help. And then their good grades or performance come with that. And then this approval and temporary good feelings, and that produces this sense that was the right thing to do. This is the cycle we're going to repeat over and over again. Hard work, study, sometimes over preparation, and lo and behold, it proves itself. I got the outcome that I wanted. But it doesn't ever seem to really change those underlying insecurities because we put our faith in the cycle instead, and we repeat it because it's reinforced. So while those studies and articles and speakers, I don't know if you've looked at all those YouTubes, there's all kinds of resources out there that will address this. Way too, if you go on YouTube, you can get lost there in the number of presentations on the topic. But what's interesting is people will say imposter syndrome was never in the DSM. It was never in that diagnostic manual of mental disorders that are diagnosed and then treated. And yet that original study talks about the way to resolve the mindset is through therapy, which I think is interesting. And that psychology today says that those who experience it, this makes me cringe, struggle with self-efficacy, perfectionism, and neuroticism, all mental health terms. So when people say it's not a thing, Jimmy, when we get into Jimmy read an article about this too, and we were kind of talking about it. When people say it's not a real syndrome, it's not a real syndrome. It's interesting how it's kind of controversial when people talk about it in the media, even Psychology Today. So going back to that CEO mastermind that came up, what was interesting is I had one of the CEOs was bringing up a situation, and we'll talk about triggers in a little bit, but she brought up a situation that for her, you could hear the language she was choosing. She kept saying to someone who was older than her and had experience in a different facet of the business that was deeper than her own. She said, I keep trying to tell her, but I'm the boss. And someone else was in the room and said, that makes me cringe when you say that, because I was the person on the other side of that who said, who do you think you are? And she said, I wonder if the reason you're saying that is because you're feeling insecure about your position. You're younger than her. You don't have experience in that particular area. And the light bulb went off. And all of a sudden we got into this conversation about imposter syndrome again. And interestingly, when we got halfway through, I'd say, one of the people said, I have to say, I actually disagree. There is no such thing as imposter syndrome. It's like, oh my goodness, we are right back here again. So I'm wondering what from the knowledge that you have about the topic, your experience with it, perhaps, if we can pause for a minute and just unmute ourselves and say at this point what you know about it, or what you're thinking about it, or what your own experience is with it. I mean, if you're coaches, you might have clients or friends or family who have experience with it. What do you know about it?
I'll start by saying I don't know enough about it. And it is something that comes up quite frequently. And one of the things that drove me to today's topic is to get a little bit more clarity, because when we talk to our clients, we realize that where they feel they have imposter syndrome is not one consistent. When someone says, I need help with presentation skills, that's one thing. But when we hear I think I have imposter syndrome and I need some coaching around it. All right, let's unpack it. What are we seeing? And then there's such a myriad of behavioral descriptors that come with, and everything you just mentioned, from insecurities, from background, belonging, it all varies. I just wonder if over time, this imposter syndrome has now just become a catch-all of everything that we are looking to address, where in the past it was one topic and you would come for only one thing. Whereas here it's more, I feel around all of these situations and all of these deficiencies or inefficiencies are areas where I can build muscle, that I need help. And is it also more because there is such a high level of expectation when we do show up that might look and come from such a variety of areas? Fear of job loss, right? So that's where I needed some clarity today, because what I'm hearing out there and what I'm personally experiencing as well is so wide ranging. So sorry for wide ranging answers, probably more than you had anticipated. So sorry for that.
No, that's great. That's great. Anyone else?
I agree with what Sergio's saying because it is wide ranging. Everybody's different, right? And it is a catch-all. Like Karen, you had said, it's an insecurity. So it's an insecurity. It's a feeling of I don't have the right skills or my skills are not developed enough. And I mean, I'm grateful that this term is not in the DSM. I think that would be a tragic addition to the DSM because it's not debilitating. It could hold you back and you might want to work through it. But gosh, if it ever gets into the DSM, I think we've just like opened a floodgate of a very long manual. It's already long enough. We don't need to make it longer by adding this. I'm not saying it's made up. It absolutely exists. But I think we've glorified the term in a very bad way.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Yeah,
Eric,
I think, oh, go ahead, Eric. Yes, you had your hand up.
Go ahead, Eric.
To unmute.
And then
Yeah,
Sherry
thanks.
will raise her hand.
Sure. Okay. Karen, I would be interested to get your thoughts on this. There's this definition I have of imposter syndrome that I sort of have in my head. And when it comes up with clients, I often say, well, let's like try and define what it is that we're talking about here. But the definition that I use is sort of this, I'm paraphrasing, but this sort of belief that I'm an imposter, belief that I don't deserve to be here, belief that whatever I have, that I'm an imposter, right? But the second part of it, despite evidence to the contrary, that's a part of the definition. So I see it as being two parts, like I shouldn't be here, or I'm a phony, or I'm a fraud, despite evidence to the contrary. And do you see that as being an essential part of the definition as well? Or is that something that I'm clamping onto that I shouldn't?
No, I think people do. I think that is first of all, you have to ask individual people if that's true, because, there are people. I remember someone who I was mentoring who made a comment that he never had to prepare for his presentations. It just always rolled right off of his mouth. And I thought, do they really? I mean, I haven't been in the room when you gave your presentation, but is that really true? So some people don't feel insecure, and they aren't really prepared the way they should either. So there's that side of it where it's like, you're not really showing up the way you should. But I have seen people who, my experience, people who feel fraudulent, even though they have that evidence, they are high achievers. They don't believe it themselves. It's that piece I was saying about that luck, or feeling like, not really even sure how I got on this stage right now. Not sure how I got at this board table. So yeah, it is an essential element. But going back to what Sergio said, I am so averse to labels and stereotypes, because they are, I'm not sure if it was Sherry, someone put in the chat, it's buckets. It's create buckets. And I feel it does a disservice to individuals. When we're coaching, we of course are trying to unpack what those words mean to those people. So it's really important to say, if someone says I have imposter syndrome, start with, how does that feel to you? What's the evidence that you have that? When's the last time you felt that? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? And so we'll talk about that more, actually. So hopefully that will be helpful to all of you, because we're going to talk through some of that. Bucket of struggle, even better. Yeah, thanks, Jimmy. Yeah. That is the danger of imposter syndrome, is that people use it like it's sometimes it's an excuse, and other times it's just like, it's kind of like, I don't have an answer for this. I need help unpacking it. So one of the things that I think was really interesting when we had that CEO mastermind is, the interesting part was that this woman was able to be vulnerable because of the group and say out loud what her fears and insecurities were. And I think that's the benefit of coaching as well, is that it gives you the freedom to express that. And in some ways, that in itself is cathartic, because when we keep it all inside, we start to believe, one, there's no way of overcoming it, and two, no one's going to relate to it. So being able to just talk it out is a huge benefit. And I saw it right in front of my eyes, because I think sometimes what happens is, Jimmy and I were talking about this, is that people can say, just keep telling yourself affirmations. And I think of affirmations like lipstick on a pig. They're just temporal. They're not going to stick. You have to really kind of uproot the roots, expose them, and wrestle with them. They may reappear, but it doesn't mean that the work isn't worthwhile and worth testing.
Sherry has her hand up.
Sherry?
Thanks. I was just making a note of what you just said, Karen, exposing and wrestling with the roots. I really think that's poetic.
Thank
and
you.
it sticks with me. The thought I had was just, you know, and now just given this conversation, it makes me think of imposter syndrome as being this broad banner, this word, this concept that we have somehow as a professionals have latched onto, and it's such a compartmentalized situation oftentimes when it comes to self-doubt. We may have doubt and you know, it just has like the example Sergio had mentioned, like presentation skills, right? And how well you come across, and how well you how well you come across as credible in your presentation, for example. You know, that's like one sliver of perhaps a skill set that you have. But when we think about this concept, it starts to broad brush ourselves as a professional, and it works against us, I think.
Yeah, and one of the things that I found interesting when I actually wrote articles in 2021 about this. So this dates back to when I was hearing it a lot back then. And what I thought was, it's that sometimes that self-doubt is healthy. If I'm going to go in front of a group of people and give a presentation on something, chances are I'm going to prepare even better for them out of respect for the group. That's not a harmful thing. That's a challenge to myself to perform at a higher level. That doesn't have to be a negative thing. But one of the things, have you guys ever heard of, I think I was talking to Jimmy about this and he hadn't heard of it. It's a kind of a strategy called TTR. It's trigger, thought, and response. And what it does is it gives you the trigger is, okay, give me the last time you, client, felt what you think is imposter syndrome. And it's getting to the context of it. Oftentimes, if you look at all the studies, it's related to career. At least that's the way it's been studied. It's related to career. Because if you think of we're the same person in different contexts, right? I don't feel insecure as a parent. I am an amazing cook and baker. I don't feel insecure in the kitchen. But put me in front of the very people, the CEOs and the boards that I work with, and it depends. I mean, it really depends. There's some cases where I feel like I have mastered the level of competency they expect. And there's other times. I used to work in Palm Beach, and in Palm Beach, my board was all executives of major corporations. And when I sat in the room with them for the first, I would say 6 months, I couldn't grow a nail. I was like, this is frightening. And over time, as I got to know them better, I started to reduce my stress and started to get, like, that's that proximity thing. The more you get to know people, the more you start to understand that they don't see you the way you see yourself. And it felt like I started to earn respect. And I started to personally self-soothe when I would go into a room. I knew those people knew me well enough, and they knew my expectations were as high as theirs. And I got to that point too, Sherry, what you said about psychological safety, that psychological safety starts out with, do you feel like you belong in the room? The next is, do you feel like you can speak up? The next is, do you think you can make a mistake in the room? And the last is, can you be a thought leader in the room? So there's stages of psychological safety, and it took me time to sit in that boardroom and feel good about myself. But then, like I said, it's context. In other cases, my ego's like, hey, I belong here. I feel fine. So when it comes to a client, the question can be, can you think of a time when insecurity came up or overtook you? And let's talk about the who, what, where, and when of that. In fact, can you think of a time right now? Just get something in your mind. Back in 2021, when I was doing all this writing, there was an article in Harvard Business Review that took the audience by storm and became this topic that at one point they said this was the most downloaded article of the year, I guess. It might have been more than that. And I actually found the article irritating because it flipped the script entirely and said instead of the insecurities being our problem, it was the organization's problem. That the culture at the organization was creating biases, racism. It was making it used the word, another word of the season was microaggressions. It created this place where they didn't want you to belong. The culture was set up so you didn't feel like you belonged. And the article was called Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome. Yeah. And so what was interesting to me about that was I have never felt like someone told me I had imposter syndrome. So personally, I thought it was, again, one of those broad strokes. Like, we can't just whitewash this ownership away from the individual who says they feel insecure in certain contexts. For me, it is career, and it is for a lot of people. So to say it's the organization, it's not me, then puts me in a position where I have no power to overcome it. So I found it frustrating, and I think it was frustrating that it got so much attention because I thought, yes, there are definitely instances where the organization could do far better, and they need to step up, and they need to start taking those biases seriously. Like there is culture, there is definitely culture. I grew up in an age where honestly, I think I was, I remember wanting a position at a bank that I worked at in commercial real estate, and they literally said to me, that's for boys. And so truly, yes, I mean, we can say, okay, that's definitely the culture there. So, but again, I still feel like I have a choice. I can leave an organization like that. In fact, this article goes on to say, like, how dare you make us go start our own businesses? You're forcing us out of the corporate culture and making us start new businesses. And I'm like, go girl. That's what, more power to you. You're going to create more organizations that are welcoming to all people. So I see that as a power move. But in this article, it was kind of like, shame on everybody else for telling us we're this. So when you thought about a trigger and you thought about a scenario where you felt insecure, does anyone feel comfortable sharing? Or a client's case, maybe?
I'll share.
Okay.
I had to do a presentation for the organization's president and CEO and the entire one of the subcommittees that he leads. 2 years in the organization, considerably new to comparable 10 years of 20 plus years. It's a highly recognized organization all over the world, and here I am, and I need to do a presentation, and who's this guy thinking he's gonna come? That's my narrative, right? Who's this guy coming here to tell us something we don't know? We're all physicians, we're all experts, we are the world's most renowned, you know it. So that's my story. So that was my trigger. Boom.
And so when you were facing that, can you recall what some of the negative self-talk was? Like you just said, who am I? Who am I to be the person who would address this group? What else?
There are two things that came early on is how did I get to this spot? Like how where, who am I to be here? So what got me here? Um, will I share something that they don't already know? What puts me in the position of sharing this to perceivably people who know what's going on in the world in healthcare? and what can I contribute? And what if they disagree? And what if they decide that this guy makes no contributions here? Why did we hire him? Out he goes. Go back to where you came from.
Mm-hmm. Part of me wants to do a whole coaching session so you can all see how that goes. And other parts of me knows I have coaches in the room, and you probably have questions of your own. But Sergio gave some great, he led up to some great questions like, well, who are you to be in the room? How did you get there? And just talking through, because what happens is we get in that very emotional space. And by starting to introduce questions that bring you up to your head, it starts to reduce that stress response that we get, where we start to like run and have that fearful response. And, like the whole fearful response with cortisol coursing through our body. And we're trying to dampen that and get it back in order, get it balanced. So there's a lot of questions that can come straight out of that. If I were to take those questions a little bit further, we might find, as I've heard with other people, that, what's the worst thing that could happen? I could lose my job. I could be publicly humiliated. I might actually put a promotion at risk. I might lose status or respect. At a minimum, I won't perform at my best, and that could be embarrassing. What other things do you think of?
I think it comes down to the performance piece as well. In how does this presentation line up with, so if the presentation didn't land, is that then in line with other areas where he is not performing where he should be? So they wouldn't know because I don't report to them.
Right.
Right. So it's the beyond, because when you were talking earlier about the belonging piece, I feel that sense of security within my team. I feel it in other presentations. I can stand up. I have stood up in front of groups, 400-500 plus people. So that's not the issue. It's the smaller group, actually, as a matter of fact, right? It's these 12 top executives of an organization that I'm thinking, holy crap, the pressure is extremely high here. And what if I don't deliver? So those are those thoughts. And then and the association with why the imposter syndrome. And it comes down to the head nodder piece I had put in the chat, is that it's so easy to label it. Maybe it's imposter syndrome, and then everybody in the group goes, "Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, and
yeah,
then what does
imposter
labeling do
syndrome."
for you? I
Exactly.
mean, what
No,
does labeling really do for
yeah.
us?
What does it
And
do?
here's, because I asked the question, like, what are the benefits of taking the risk and being in the room despite those feelings?
The
What
benefits of taking those risks is that when I switch out of the feeling mode and I get into my own coaching mode. So what do I do to coach through it? Is what can you learn from it? You're here, right? So I do that self-talk before just to get me to present. Doesn't mean that I'm not sweating in my armpits and buckets of sweat coming out of my forehead. It's the for one, you're working here. You went through a vetting process, so you belong. And where I sometimes on my own note wonder with imposter syndrome is to what degree does it become self-imposed imposter syndrome? And because the insecurity is to what degree, the self-doubt to what degree, and where does that pressure come in? So what am I truly afraid of? You said something earlier that I took a note of is why do you feel like a fraud?
Right.
And that's a question that I'm taking with me out of today.
Right. That's like I said, that unearthing of the roots of those thoughts and then putting them to the test. A lot of times what happens is in our responses, we go to like self-preservation. We procrastinate, we lean back on our perfectionism. I'm guilty of over preparing. I'll always feel like I haven't prepared enough. I haven't practiced enough. This better be. I was telling Jimmy about having to do this presentation over in Palm Beach at the Breakers, and there were 450 women at this event, and I was the CEO, and so people kept coming to me. Oh, you have to meet this donor. Oh, you have to help us with this issue that's going on right now. Oh, this volunteer has a question. In the meantime, I'm supposed to be in like a half hour standing in front of the entire luncheon giving a speech, and I had to keep excusing myself to go to the restroom just so I could get in a stall and practice by myself because people wouldn't leave me alone. And when you think about those kinds of conditions and you put your performance anxiety in the mix with it and perfectionism, you can, talk about like sweat in your arms. It's like, oh my goodness, am I going to be able to stand up in front of people and not have my voice calm? And so it can be, it kind of can come back to our own standards. And I've said before, like, the perfectionist doesn't know that their standards are perfection. They just think those are the standards. And that's kind of hard because you can also, unfortunately, put those on other people. And so you're disappointed a lot. That's just an aside because it's true. You just think, oh, that's the bar for everybody. I honestly don't think that people who aren't high achievers. So do the low achievers just think they're always doing a great job? Like, I'm just curious.
All the time.
Like, how's it feel to always be doing a great job? I want to know.
Mediocrity is like the greatest drug for feeling like they're doing a great job. only the super high achievers have this imposter syndrome because of that. Whether it's the perfectionism that they've become accustomed to because they've just been doing that. It's a habit. They're a habit of excellence, and when they're all of a sudden confronted with, oh my God, I'm not excellent, now you're in a weird space. It's no longer comfortable and you're feeling weird. But people in mediocrity and low performers, they always think they're awesome. Like, who's going to fire me? And then it happens. They're like, oh.
Yes, they get rewarded for it. Yes, Sergio said. Well, the other thing too is so many of these thoughts are rooted in our young minds. And it's also the time where there's in some cases where you may say to a client, hey, do you think this is something that a therapist could come alongside of you too? Because obviously we're not therapists. But I think about those messages that we all got. Like, I heard this one woman say vulnerability is for losers. Never let them see you sweat. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps. Mm-hmm. And when we think about things, like I always use the comparison of when we repress things, we keep them unconscious and just deny them, or we suppress them, or we express them. Suppressing them takes real energy to act like you're not feeling the way you're feeling. That's why I say when people say, oh, positive reframing, I say putting lipstick on a pig, because if you're only just using that energy to say, shut up, I'm not going to listen to you, then it takes a lot of energy and it doesn't actually weed it out. So I say the better route is to express it where you feel safe. And so if coaching is the place you feel safe, great. I'm not a big one for expressing those things to family and friends because I don't actually believe them. When they say you're wonderful, I think you're supposed to say that. So I go to people who can give true evidence. And so when I think about kind of a personal plan for overcoming self-doubt, I think first and foremost, using that example of when I was at the Breakers, I was exhausted. I was hungry. I didn't have time to really practice. And so physically, I was not in the best condition to be doing this. So if you're going to do presentations, let's say, or you're going to do something that you are feeling insecure about, then take care of yourself physically first and foremost, because that's going to deplete you and you're not going to be ready for the mental lift you have to make. The other thing is that I find works is to fix your eyes on the most noble of your values. So instead of being perfectionist, say, well, what would perfection mean on at the end of my life? I was brave. I was courageous. I was generous. Define excellence by those higher standards. And just like I asked Sergio, what's the value of taking this risk? Focus on those highest of values and say, when I come out on the other side of this, what will I take away? What will I be most proud of that I accomplished here? That I remember one time sitting with my little baby on my lap because I had to do something really, really difficult. And I remember looking at him, he was 18 months old about, and I remember looking at him going, I need you on my lap right now. You're going to be my service animal. I need you right here when I make this really hard phone call. And I just remember saying, when I come on the other side of this, I'm going to be able to say to my son, as years go by, sometimes you have to do the hard things. You have to have the difficult conversations. You have to be brave. You have to be courageous. You have to show other people. If you want to be a great leader, then you have to do hard things sometimes. You have to demonstrate that you will be healthy, fine, whole on the other side of it. The other thing is to look at when people, your clients are saying things like what their trigger was. Was there comparison? Oftentimes you're looking around the room and you're going, I'm not qualified in this room. Well, who says so? You're there for a reason. So then as a coach, you start going back and forth with them to test who says you're not the right person. Let's talk about your resume. Let's talk about how you got there. Why are you the right person? If they're saying luck, then say, well, then you found yourself at the right place in the right time, and you have the skills and the knowledge apparently because you're right there and you have this opportunity. So comparison can be a huge trigger for people. The other one is when you're doing solo work as a leader and it feels like all eyes are on you. That can be a very big trigger because it feels like the weight and responsibility lies with you. And in that case, you want to tease that out for people because they got into a leadership position for a reason. Somehow someone thought they were the right person at the right time. And they've probably demonstrated repeatedly that they've done hard things and they've been an excellent leader. And you're just going to need to tap into that as a coach and draw that out. The other is to keep a list of evidence of your achievements. Pull out your resume, start looking at things that you've accomplished. I'm a learner, so a lot of times I just think that it's never enough. But I can look at my resume and I always have I have 3 colleagues I can call and say, I have to make this really big presentation. I'm feeling stressed about it. And they'll hold up the mirror and give me a little bit, be a cheerleader for me and remind me that I've done this before. It's always goes well. I always learn from it. So I have those people. And then, yeah, be prepared. If it's a script you need, write the script and practice it until you feel comfortable with it, but be prepared. And trying to think if there's anything else that I go to. And like I said, I do have personally, there are personal things like when I was thinking about my child and saying, who is going to inspire me to be up above these standards I have set for myself? Who is going to challenge me to do greater things?
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful. I like what Sergio, I like that about the resume. I strongly believe in that. If you want to lift yourself up and you want to realize what you really bring to the table, update your resume. We don't often look back and go, what do I really do around here? And then you go, oh my God, I do so much. And as for I'm looking at Holly's thing. Blocked on your organization. Oh my goodness. Holly, I'm going to have a talk with those people. Yeah, I put the link to the survey in there. Holly can't do it, but that's all right. Holly, we know. Give it. What are we rating today? A 10? Awesome. Okay, I'll put that in there for you.
The last thing I'd say, which I think just as I've coached people, experienced it myself, and studied this, is that I see when people are expressing feelings of insecurity, I ask them where they are. What's the opposite of insecurity? Confidence. So is it a spectrum? How can we move you from where you feel like you're insecure on a scale of 1 to 10? Where are you? How do we move you from a 7 to, let's say, a 9? What would it take to do that? There are people who think I feel incompetent. I am not competent enough to be in this room. Well, let's put a number on that. What does that mean? You're incompetent. Are you truly incompetent? Well, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you in terms of competence, do you think? What could you do between now and the time, this happens a lot with people who have just taken on a new job. I had someone who like freaked out because she took a new job and called me and started crying because I had recommended her for it. And I said, can you give yourself 3 months? Give yourself 3 months to get deep into that learning curve. Where do you think you would be in terms of competence based on your experience? Well, I might move from where I feel now up 3 notches. Right. Can you allow yourself time and grace? It takes courage for you to do that. Your employer will love that you have courage and that you're willing to do that on their behalf. And then another one it's interesting, is high achievers who have that insecurity tend to rebuff accolades. I used to say, like, it's humility. And then I got to the point where it was like, or is it low self-worth? There's some place there where you're like, you go from arrogance on one end to complete modesty, like you just can't accept. Where could you be that you would actually celebrate one of your achievements? Could you add something that you could pause and say, look at what I did, and kind of document your achievement? Because it's hard for people who have that high achieving insecurity. It's hard for them to do that. And the last one I'd say is that the spectrum is flawed and perfection. And are you really so flawed that you can't meet the expectations of whatever your job, this challenge? And how could you change your standards so that you could say that you achieved excellence? Any thoughts?
Karen, what comes to me is those terrible words of, is it enough? So achieving goals, meeting expectations, but was it enough? And yeah, that's what comes to mind for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Martha, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that everything you say resonates a lot. And I think it's important for us to be honest with ourselves sometimes and say, okay, yeah, maybe I'm feeling this way because I didn't prepare, or I should prepare a little more, or maybe I do lack those skills. And just sort of having the humility to see ourselves for where we are. And what kind of helps me often is also just realizing and being honest and saying, yeah, maybe I don't have those skills right now, but the important thing is that I have the ability to learn those skills and be where I need to be. So now what do I need to do to actually get down to business, learn those skills, and shift myself from this insecurity to confidence, rather than just like playing some sort of mental games to pretend like, oh yes, I am so great and wonderful. Like,
right.
I think it's a balance, right? Like, I think part of
Right.
it is, for me personally, I do need a lot of reassurance. If somebody tells me, oh, that was really great, or recently somebody said, I sent them my resume for something and they're like, wow, this is really impressive. And I was like, oh, really? So sometimes we don't even realize our own accomplishments. So that helps. But yeah, so it's part of it is not being so harsh, recognizing our skills and achievements, and also recognizing where we are falling short and maybe, working on those aspects.
Mm-hmm. And I think coming up with I see Holly's hand up. I think coming up with some meaningful measures for ourselves where, like, as Sherry said, good enough. What will we, for ourselves, because that's different for everybody, what will make us feel satisfied? What will make us feel like we achieved the mark we were shooting for? I mean, do we need 10s from everybody, or do we need to feel like I delivered the kind of presentation, or I delivered the kind of performance, or I hit the numbers that were expected of me? Like, come up with those measures ourselves, independent. And yes, your boss will have some measures for you too, but come up for some for ourselves that we can be happy with and celebrate. Holly?
This was just super timely, Karen. So thank you so much.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
This is very timely. I just want to thank you so much. It's a lot. And so I was typing furiously. So I just wanted to say thank you. I was thinking about this. One of the things you said earlier is like, just telling yourself affirmations and not doing the hard work. And I don't know why this came to me, but there's a lot of pressure on people, to, I don't know, I guess it's that achievement culture, or I was likening it to like the gratitude journals. And I know that there's a lot of research around, if we spend all the time being, full of gratitude, but I did something pretty cathartic not too long ago. I was like, you know what if I just wrote a list of things that just really ticked me off? And it really, really bothered me. It helped me get to the root of why I thought I had to do a gratitude journal in the first place. And so anyway, that came up for me as you were talking earlier on. And I was like, it's okay to not have to pretend with ourselves about stuff. And so anyway.
Well, you're speaking to what I said about suppressing how we really feel and just telling ourselves, just like dampen that. I don't want to think about that, and it's true. I don't know if you know the book, but it's Positivity by Dr. Barbara Fredrickson. It's a book that's like 10 years old, but it's evidence that positive statements, if you do them in the ratio of 3 to 1, a negative emotion, if you get 1 negative emotion, 3 positive ones will put you back in balance where you're positive. And optimism truly does bring on better health, better relationships, better performance. Like, we want those things, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't also work through negative experiences and why things tick us off, I agree. Thanks for sharing that.
Well, we are at time, but if anybody has anything, Eric, do you have to run or you want to talk about something?
I have to run, but I want to thank Karen. It was awesome. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Eric.
All right, guys,
Thanks,
I'm gonna run.
Sherry.
See you, bud.
Thanks, everybody.